So good evening again. Our lecture tonight is about Gideon Klein, a young and promising musician who did not live to fulfill his potential. He was murdered by the German Nazis. I am glad and honored to introduce you to Dr. David Fligg, an Honorary Research Fellow at the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester, where he was previously lecturer in academic studies. He's also visiting professor at Chester University and is affiliated to the Center of Jewish Studies at Leeds University. Between 2014 and 2018, David was project consultant for the UK Arts and Humanities Research Council project, Performing the Jewish Archive, Rediscovering Jewish and Theater. In December 2019, David wrote a full-length biography on Gideon Klein in Czech that will be published in English version later this year. As usual, you're all muted, so there will be no disturbance at the lecture, but you can write your questions and marks in the chat down below. And at the end of the lecture, David will answer the question that you have. So I wish you all a pleasant evening, and David, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Tammy, and good early evening from the UK, and good later evening to friends and colleagues in Israel and indeed around the world. It's great to see family, friends and colleagues here. A special welcome, because we haven't been in touch for a while, and without wanting to make him blush, but a special welcome to Murray Sidlin, my dear friend, and it's great to see you here, Murray. It's been a while since I visited Beit Terezín, but now that travel is permitted between the UK and Israel, so we hope that we can have renewed collaboration. So I'm going to share a screen. And as always, it takes a bit of a while to load up, but we will get there in a few moments. Here we go. So today's story seems to have all the ingredients of an epic, if not tragic, film. We've got this young genius and his potential cruelly crushed by an evil regime, a stack of hidden papers and manuscripts mysteriously turning up in post-communist Eastern Europe, a family working for the anti-Nazi resistance, arrests, executions, clandestine music making under the noses of the Nazis, a heartrending letter smuggled out of a concentration camp, and much more besides. And overwhelmed and excited in equal measure when in the archives of Prague's Jewish Museum, I was presented with stacks of archival material which had never been evaluated, never mind translated. And it started me on a journey, an odyssey, from the achingly beautiful city of Prague to the remote forest of unmarked and forgotten mass graves in Polish Silesia, via hours spent interviewing Holocaust survivors, and finally the publications of my investigations. So this is the background to what I'm going to cover today. And in the foreground, we have this remarkable musician, Gideon Klein, outrageously talented, affectionate, single-minded, and very, very brave. And what we'll be examining during this session are two pieces of music by him, which were discovered amongst the previously hidden hoard of manuscripts. One piece composed during and which directly reflects the German occupation of Prague, and the other piece which remained totally overlooked until I facilitated its world premiere in 2016, and which seems to be some sort of premonition of dark times in the immediate pre-war period. And of course, I'll also be talking about Gideon Klein's imprisonment in Terezín itself. And I'll be using the Czech title Terezín rather than the Germanized form of Theresienstadt. Just a word about my own research into Gideon's life and music. My full-length biography on him, Letter from Gideon, Dopis od Gideona, was published in Czech to mark his centenary in 2019. The English version has been much delayed because of the pandemic, but it will be available later this year. And you'll also find my various journal articles and chapters in edited volumes focusing on aspects of his music and life. From July 2019 to February 2020, I co-curated a festival in the Czech Republic to mark the composer's centenary. And with the title Guido's Coming Home, it encouraged audiences to ponder on why Gideon, or Guido as he was known to family and friends, was coming home. Where was home? Why had he been away? And indeed, it brought Gideon out of ghetto Terezín back to the city he adored, Prague, as well as other Czech towns and cities. And you'll see from this timeline the main headlines of Gideon Klein's short life, from being a precociously talented pianist in his Moravian town of Přerov, to being something of a teenage wunderkind in pre-war Prague, to being at the center of organizing cultural activities in that strange phenomenon which was the Terezín ghetto and prison camp, to his murder in an Auschwitz subcamp. This timeline isn't only about one individual, but it's indicative of the cultural fracture at best, destruction at worst, that the Third Reich inflicted. Whether through murder or exile, the musical fabric and environment of Europe and those countries where émigrés settled was changed forever. It's worth pondering on the shock felt by Czech Jews in March 1939 at the start of the German occupation of Bohemia and Moravia. Between the wars, Czech Jews enjoyed a golden age. They thrived. There was a pro-Jewish, pro-Zionist president in Thomas Masaryk, and in many ways the Jewish community wasn't unlike my own here in the UK. Disproportionately well educated compared to the rest of the population, relatively affluent and culturally savvy. And even though Nazi Germany and later Nazi Austria and the German annexed Sudetenland were next door, Czech Jews felt secure. But it tells us something about the fragility of our existence, that circumstances can change in a flash. And though the world was Gideon's oyster when he graduated from high school in the summer of 1938, by the following summer, he was making music under German occupation. It's the closing weeks of 1941. Gideon is summoned to be deported to Terezín as part of a work detail of young men known as the Aufbaukommando. And they are ordered to make the camp habitable for the influx of Jewish prisoners. Shortly before his departure, he meets his dear friend, Hanna Jantowska. She recalls the final goodbye to her special friend. And I quote, "I met Gideon on a corner in the old Jewish quarter, the site rich with history and fateful events. It was at the end of November. Gideon told me in passing that he had received his summons for the Aufbaukommando in Terezín. We said goodbye, keeping the old formal tone. Don't do anything silly and take good care of yourself," he said, and I babbled something about the invincible power of hope and we shall see each other soon again. But it was our last encounter, and I think that he knew. 2 days before his 22nd birthday, he leaves Prague for the last time. Terezín would be his prison until his final deportation to Auschwitz and its subcamp of Fürstengrube 3 months before his murder there. The freezing cold winter in landlocked Czechoslovakia. The temperature in December hardly rises above freezing at best. So Gideon's priority is to pack warm clothing. He doesn't want to run the risk of taking any items which might be confiscated. So he gathers together the manuscripts of compositions that he'd written, plus other memorabilia such as photos, correspondence, and so on, places them in a suitcase, which he entrusts for safekeeping to a friend, Edward Herzog, who in turn hands them to his non-Jewish wife, Vera. In Terezín, Gideon continues to compose. And I don't use the word lightly when I say that the trio for violin, viola and cello and the piano sonata, which he composes during imprisonment, are masterpieces. Most of the music he writes in the camp survives due to the quick thinking of his girlfriend, the wonderfully devoted Irma Semetska, who hides them until the camp is liberated. She then hands them over to Gideon's sister, Lisa Kleinova, herself a professional pianist, who would later supervise their publication and performance. And that might have been that. A young composer remembered exclusively by the compositions he wrote shortly before his death during imprisonment. And for the pre-Terezín compositions, even if they were known about before 1941, they became forgotten. In any case, Gideon's public musical activities in Prague were exclusively in the area of being a pianist. And though he studied composition at the Prague Conservatory from October 1939 until early 1940, when the universities were shut down by the Nazis, there's no record of any of his compositions ever receiving public performances. Composition, it seems, was something of a private affair for Gideon. As his sister Lisa says, "I don't even know what Gideon was composing at that time. We lived from one day to another, worrying about how to make money to survive, how to make contact with my sister and her husband, and to cope with all of this." After the war, Lisa Kleinova, the family's sole survivor, returned to Prague, where she remained until her death in 1999. The Herzog family, which possessed Gideon's suitcase of manuscripts, also survived. It's extraordinary to think that they somehow forgot about the suitcase, and it begs the question as to why they didn't hand it over to Lisa until 1990. The answer to that lies in the territory of an anti-Semitic post-war communist regime, where it was deemed prudent, if you were a Jew, to keep one's head below the parapet. The Herzogs perhaps reckoned that bringing to light this artistic treasure trove from a Jewish musician could have resulted in it being deliberately and forever confiscated. To a large extent, the life and music of Gideon Klein has been largely referenced by his plight as a prisoner. Creativity through adversity, spiritual resistance, artistic defiance make for good stories. Up until recently, his pre-Terezín compositions have been overshadowed by those he composed in the camp, and his life in Prague was largely unknown prior to my research. In my theatrical presentation, Gideon Klein, Portrait of a Composer, I focused largely, though by no means exclusively, on the Prague years in order to create a picture of an enthusiastic and young musician. Here's a taster, a section using the words of the actual diary that Gideon kept whilst in Italy, when he went to visit in 1938, and correspondence to and from family. Now, I must say that during our sound check earlier this evening, the video was juddering and spluttering. And if this is the case, I hope that the Beit Terezín team will tell me, and then we can move on. But if it does work, it lasts about 3 minutes.
I am so proud of my little brother. Today, he graduated from school with a distinction. In 2 months' time, he'll go on a 1-month tour of Italy with his friends. He is standing on his own 2 feet now. He's already culturally mature in great literature and contemporary music. Now, he wants to experience great visual art.
Dear Mum and all the family, we cannot even begin to imagine the beauty. I saw my first Michelangelo. There are many in Florence. I was spellbound by Brutus and David. I've been to the Museo Nazionale, and I'm planning a trip to the Uffizi and Pitti. I can't wait to tell you when I return to Prague. I've got the amazing Raphaels, Titians, Tintorettos and Van Dycks. I've been keeping detailed notes. The town of Florence is so beautiful. The Palazzo Vecchio, Ponte Vecchio, the chapel, with the tombs of Michelangelo, Cappella del Podesta and the Palazzo Bargello, with the famous frescoes by Giotto. Dante's portrait there too, amongst others. I am immersed in beauty, art, but music still flows through my veins. When I saw Rembrandt's 2 self-portraits in like visual versions on the music of late Beethoven. Kisses to you, my darling mother and sisters. I miss you all.
Dear Gideon, so, Mother has read your letter to me. I can't wait for you to tell me everything. Darling, have a wonderful time, and although I am not with you, I am always with you in spirit. Oh, and what about your clothes? Do you have enough? Kisses from Lisa.
My dear sister, do not fear. I have a list of what I need. They are 3 towels, 1 napkin, a knife, a fork, spoon and tumbler, pajamas, 2 swimsuits, 2 t-shirts, 1 hat, a pair of slippers, a pair of shorts and 2 suits, 5 pairs of trousers, plus 1 for travelling, 16 shirts, plus 1 for travelling, 17 pairs of socks plus 1 for travelling, 15 handkerchiefs plus 1 for travelling, and 2 pairs of shoes. Not forgetting 1 for travelling. I was going to take 20 ties, but decided to only take 18.
So, amongst the compositions rediscovered in 1990 are 2 ambitious string quartets, a finely crafted song cycle, an experimental duo for violin and viola, and an incomplete yet substantial duo for violin and cello. and numerous sketches and incomplete works, including a setting of Shabbat Kiddush, the Shema, and a psalm. And also in that suitcase, we find an intriguing and enigmatic melodrama for narrator and piano, and an extensive work for wind ensemble. And it's these two works that I'm going to talk about. They reflect and are intrinsically connected to Europe on the brink of war and the challenges of living as a Jew under Nazi occupation. By sheer luck, these works have survived, and they enrich our understanding of creativity under adversity. Under Lisa Kleinov's supervision, the completed and almost complete works in the suitcase were edited, published, and eventually recorded. And this is the case for the Divertimento for 8 wind instruments that I'm going to introduce to you. But one of the pieces, the poplar tree, or topol in Czech, remained inexplicably forgotten about until I blew 70 years worth of dust from it, and more about this soon. The German occupation comes in March 1939, and before too long, the recently appointed President Emil Haksha and his puppet government has little option but to accept the legality of the anti-Jewish Nuremberg laws. In force in all territory which is now under Hitler's control, these are now applied to the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, as the country was now named. Jews are now defined as a separate race. All Jewish property has to be registered, and by July 1939, Jews are beginning to be excluded from a number of high-level professions. In particular for musicians, they are no longer able to perform in public. The deteriorating situation for Jews is a contributing factor in Gideon's decision to seriously focus on composition, though he also implements a plan so that he can continue to perform in public as a pianist. He commences work on his Divertimento, his most ambitious work to date. He's just 19 years old. In January 1940, he's asked to take part as the pianist in 2 identical evenings of music and poetry devoted to Moravian culture with music by Janáček. But there's a problem. The new restrictions mean that as a Jew, he can't perform in public. So he assumes a pseudonym for the purposes of the concert's printed publicity, as you can see on the screen. And he takes the name Karel Vranek, and maybe choosing the typically Czech name Karel as a nod towards Czech solidarity and nationalism, and the derivative of a name meaning free man. His secret is safe amongst his colleagues and even amongst the press. The music critics who had frequently critiqued Gideon's concerts know exactly who Karel Vranek is, but the reviews of the concert keep up Gideon's ruse. One of the pieces which Gideon performs in these concerts is The Diary of One Who Disappeared. For 5 voices and piano, this is one of Janáček's most enigmatic works, a hybrid inhabiting a territory between song cycle and opera. And its nostalgic drama now has significance for Gideon at that particular time. The work hides a mystery. When the poems about a Moravian boy who falls in love with and is seduced by a gypsy girl were first published as anonymous folk poetry in a newspaper in 1916, they were, some 70 years later, discovered to be something of a hoax, penned by the writer Josef Calder. Not that it would have mattered one way or another to the unhappily married Janáček, who at the time of composition was embroiled in the closely documented, unrequited love affair of his own with the happily married and Jewish Kamila Sturslova. Nor does it matter to Gideon or his audience. He identifies with the Moravian boy, the one who disappeared in order to break free from a parochial environment in search of a new life. Many in the audience acknowledge the intense atmosphere of a work which is also about finding freedom. For them, such freedom is now a chimera. Perhaps herein lies a clue as to why Gideon chooses his new name of Karel, the free man. In Janacek's piece, the freedom which the boy discovers isn't necessarily one of liberation, for it's tinged with the poignancy of having to leave one's past behind. As the final song reminds us, there can be no return from the life I'm beginning. At exactly the same time as these two concerts, Gideon was working on his Divertimento, started the previous June and completed in April 1940. The third movement of this work brings us to the heart of what was going on with Gideon with regard to circumstance and environment. It's a set of variations on a melody from Janacek's The Diary of One Who Disappeared. The text of the song, "The sun climbs high," asking the question, what have I lost now? Who can give it back again? Having been compelled to perform the Janacek under an assumed name, Gideon is now working on his set of variations, not as Vranek, but as Klein. What he has lost is his name, and he can claim it back not through public performance as a pianist, but through composition, as a composer. After all, composition isn't prescribed by the Nazis, though public performance for Jews is. In the final variation of this movement, Gideon writes the words Mystoso majestically on the music, and there, with slow-moving long notes, we hear a concealed and transposed version of the notes B flat, A, C, and B. In German musical notation, B flat is the note B, B natural is H, thus it spells out the name of Bach, B-A-C-H. So with its acknowledgement to both Janacek and Bach, is Gideon making a majestic, to use his own word, statement, which connects the vanishing world of his Moravian roots and the gradual destruction of European musical culture, which had Bach as its figurehead. Here's the opening.
David, we can't hear the music.
I just had a message to say that you can't hear the music. Exactly why, I don't know. Maybe I should try starting it from the beginning.
Maybe we'll try to share again and see that the box of share sound is also
Okay. Okay, I'm stopping sharing and I will share again.
okay. Make sure that the box of share sound is also too.
Is that any better?
Yes.
Yeah. So essentially that's Gideon's arrangement, if you like, of the Janicek melody, and then he turns it into a set of variations. My apologies for the lack of sound. Technology is wonderful when it works, and a nightmare when it doesn't. But anyhow, there's more. Because in the final movement of the Divertimento, we arrive at music which is decidedly edgy. Janicek's theme that Gideon used earlier is here transformed into the opening of the Hussite battle hymn, Ye Who Are Warriors of God, the first example in Gideon's music of what could be described as spiritual resistance through music. Fiercely nationalistic in sentiment, Gideon would have been well aware of the Czech nationalist potency of this hymn, as were the Nazis, because they attempted to forbid the performance of this tune. And also in this final movement, the BACH signature keeps making appearances, lest we forget. I also remind you that in a previous lecture in this series, Mary Sidlin also spoke about similar musical clues in the music from the other Terezín composers, Victor Ullmann and Pavel Haas. So here's the actual hymn tune. And again, if the music doesn't sound, someone will tell me. And now here is how Gideon incorporates that melody into this music. The Divertimento started life, I feel, as a light-hearted ensemble piece. And even the title suggests music which is rather light in character. But it evolved into something which reflected Gideon's predicament in particular and the tightening German occupation in general. It's documentary in the truest sense. From here on, Gideon's compositions were to comment on or reflect, whether overtly or covertly, his environment's gradual descent into chaos and darkness. The Divertimento wasn't the only or last time that Gideon would encode a message in his music, and I've discussed and written about this elsewhere. As I mentioned before, there's no evidence that any of the compositions written up to that time ever received public performances.
David?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We can't see clearly the presentation. Maybe you can close it and enter again, like just the presentation, because it's not so clear.
The gremlins are cursing us.
Sorry to disturb.
It's all right. How does that look?
Okay, it looks better.
Right, okay. So, as I mentioned before, there's no evidence that any of the compositions written up to that time ever received public performance. Gideon's own editorial amendments suggest that some were definitely prepared for prospective performance, and maybe some received private run-throughs. We don't know. One of them, though, never received a performance even after it was discovered in 1990. And here I'm referring to what I feel to be the most fascinating and most enigmatic of these works, the Poplar Tree, this short and powerful melodrama for narrator and piano. It forms part of the inventory in the archives of Prague's Jewish Museum, prepared under Lisa Kleinov's supervision in the 1990s, and it appears listed, though not discussed, in Milan Slavitsky's short biography of Gideon, written in 1995. The fact that Gideon prepared a fair copy from a rough draft suggests that he had in mind a performance of it, and that he rated the work highly. Thanks to Gideon's work, I didn't need to do much editing of the manuscript to prepare it for its world premiere in Pilsen in 2016 and its UK premiere in a BBC broadcast concert from London's Wigmore Hall. And since then, it's been performed around the world and will be published later this year by Bärenreiter. On the 21st of May 1938, Gideon graduated from the Jiříček High School in Prague, a place known for teaching very bright kids. The building is still there. It's now an elementary school and kindergarten. But up until 1938, it was part of Gideon's world, a few minutes' walk from where he lived, within walking distance of the Prague Conservatory, the National Theatre, and the cafes where Prague's artistes and intellectuals and the young Gideon himself gathered. The school building is directly opposite one of the saddest places in Prague, the Church of Saints Cyril and Methodius, and the site of the last stand of the Czech and Slovak martyrs who were part of Operation Anthropoid, the plot to assassinate Reinhard Heydrich. By the time the brave paratroopers in the church were cornered and met their deaths in June 1942, Gideon had been imprisoned in Terezín for 7 months. The sense of place in Prague is often overwhelming when viewed through the lens of World War II. That church, the tens of thousands of names of murdered Jews on the walls of the Pinkas synagogue, the Stolpersteine marking the last addresses of the deported Jews who never returned, the Kindertransport Memorial at the main railway station, and much more besides. Only 7 years separate the excitement and optimism which greeted Gideon's school graduation with the almost total annihilation of Prague's Jews. The melodrama for narrator and piano, The Poplar Tree, written shortly after he left school, seems to be an uneasy portent of the Holocaust in general and the vulnerability of Gideon's world in particular. He was surely aware of this when, sometime after completing the work, he revisited the score and wrote, "These were good times," or perhaps translated as, "These were lovely times," on the final page. Think of it for a moment. He completes the work on the 11th of July 1938. Less than a week later, with anticipation and much pleasure, he leaves with a group of friends for his month-long trip to Italy with that massive suitcase filled with all those clothes he inventoried. His school years are full of glittering prizes, and in the autumn he'll enroll as a full-time student at the Prague Conservatory. Of course, these are good times for Gideon personally, and yet all-out war was only months away, and Europe's Jews now face existential crisis. Writing on the 20th of July to Gideon in Italy, his mother, Ilona, tells him that they're taking in a boy, albeit temporarily, from the Sudetenland. The Sudeten crisis was escalating, and ethnic Czechs were feeling more and more isolated in that border area. That summer, physical assaults by Nazi-aligned stormtroopers on Sudeten Jews had started, and Ilona ends her letter with the anxious words, "I hope nothing changes before you're in Prague again." So let's imagine the scenario. Gideon arrives back in Prague on the 17th of August, readying himself for the start of the new academic year at the conservatory. Erev Rosh Hashanah fell on the 25th of September. Let's say that Gideon, even out of tradition rather than religious fervour, attends one of Prague's many synagogues. He notices that it's especially crowded. Not being particularly religiously observant, Prague's Jews fill the city's synagogues only for the high holy days. But that year, synagogue pews are overflowing, not only by locals, but also by Sudeten Jews and their rabbis who have fled their region. Even lapsed and assimilated Jews attend in 1938, perhaps hoping for divine comfort in uncertain times and to demonstrate solidarity with their community. The Munich Agreement is signed off on the 29th of September. The Czech army is demobilized. President Beneš resigns. On the 27th of October, Hitler expels, pushing them eastwards, 18,000 Polish Jews from Germany. And then on the 9th of November comes Kristallnacht, the culmination of 6 years of German government-sponsored anti-Jewish activity. The annihilation of Europe's Jews had started, and all of this in less than 4 months after finishing the poplar tree. So this, very briefly, is the socio-political background to the poplar tree. The anonymous text doesn't mention poplar trees, and as for why the image of the poplar tree influenced Gideon or why he gave the work this title, we can only speculate. The title is in the singular and not the plural, one, not many trees. The poplar, a generic title covering more than 30 different species, is in abundance in Prague. Linking it to music, poplar wood is often used by luthiers to make stringed instruments. In literature, perhaps Gideon wasn't drawn to the Romanian writer Mihai Eminescu and his poem Down Where the Lonely Poplars Grow, in view of the poet's anti-Semitism, though in any case this poem is very different in style and content to the one Gideon uses. Nor is the poplar significant in Jewish tradition. But the words are intriguing, and I've been thinking about Abel Meeropol's deeply disturbing poem and song, written under his pseudonym Lewis Allen, Strange Fruit, where poplar trees are mentioned in the context of the lynching of Black Americans. This, often referred to as the first song of the civil rights movement, was written by a New York Jew and published the year before Gideon composed his work. Meeropol's sympathies were left-wing, and for a while he identified as a communist. He was acutely aware of what was happening to Jews in Germany from 1933 onwards, and drew analogies between Black oppression in the United States and anti-Semitism in Europe. He was outraged by the Allied brokered Munich Agreement, which was to have such an impact on Czechoslovakia. I am a Jew, how may I tell? The Negro lynched reminds me well I am a Jew, he once wrote. Black body swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees, go the lines in Meeropol's poem. It's also worth mentioning that one of the most common poplar trees is Populus nigra, black poplar.
David?
Hello.
I'm sorry to stop you again, but we can't see the font, the written poem. Oh, okay. Maybe if you try again to share it. Or we can try a backup that we have with honey.
How's that?
Oh, now it's better. Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, it's okay now. I think we can read it.
All right. So let's explore this a bit further. Gideon's maternal family, the Marmersteins, were liberal-minded, artistic, well-read. Gideon's oldest sister, Edith, and her husband, Yaroslav Dolak, became part of the communist resistance in German-occupied Prague. It cost them their lives. We know that in common with young left-leaning Czech Jews, Gideon himself was a devoted Zionist and intended to visit the Soviet Union after the war. The late Ella Weisberger, who had clear memories of Gideon in Terezín, told me that he planned to go live in the land of Israel. This connection with what we might refer to today as social justice leads me to think that the Kleins in pre-war Prague were cognizant of these types of issues, not only in their part of the world, but in the USA too. We know that Gideon had gramophone records of American jazz, not least the pianist Teddy Wilson. Billie Holiday was one of Wilson's singers, and by coincidence, she recorded Strange Fruit, albeit in 1939, after the poplar tree was composed. What I'm saying is that the Kleins didn't live in a bubble. Admittedly, the theory about Gideon's title is notional, but as he and his family were very much aware of contemporary literature and mixed in circles where others shared this awareness, it's entirely feasible that Mirapol's work was brought to Gideon's attention. Even if we go along with the idea that somehow the words carry with them this type of imagery, it still leads us to speculate where they came from. The author of the words isn't indicated, but I think that they're the composer's own. Furthermore, with Gideon's words, assuming the words are by him, he was attempting to capture something of the spirit, the scansion of some of the contemporary Czech poetry he was coming into contact with. He always indicates the authorship of text on his vocal works, the omission here being a strong indicator that words and music are by the same. The poplar tree's sentiments recall Stefan Zweig's poem, Der dunkle Falter, the dark moth, which Gideon was familiar with. At the start of the 1938 academic year, he would enroll in a poetry class at Charles University, and in Terezín he took part in poetry readings, and I've discovered that he wrote poetry of his own. So I want to play you the poplar tree, this is from a BBC broadcast with the pianist Vera Bullerova and a narrator whose voice you might recognize. The level of the recording is quite low, so you might have to turn your volume up.
David, we took over because we couldn't see, but Hani will play it.
Okay.
Vast plain. Small houses are floating on it like little white boats. A clod, clods of earth, sparkling whiteness of clouds is rushing ochre boulders past the horizon. In the doorway of pain, last drops, congealed into crystals. and the wood of statues hurriedly phosphorescing. A Gothic silhouette. This is a vignette resounding through history as an oyster on the shore sounds through the sea. This is the voice of the horn, turned into sadness and wrapped all in itself, caught fire all over the distance by a sorrowful prayer. It is a blaze.
Can we have the next slide? And the next slide, please. Thank you. Had Gideon not secreted away a large batch of compositions, had his sister Lisa not survived, had the Herzog family forgot about the old suitcase in their attic, which might one day have been inadvertently destroyed, then just think how much poorer we'd be without these remarkable youthful compositions. In Terezín, once the Judenrat, the Jewish council of elders who were tasked to oversee the everyday running of the ghetto, struck a deal with the SS to allow the prisoners to organize cultural events, Gideon became central to music making in the camp. He didn't use imprisonment as mitigation for substandard performance, but continued to organize and take part in high quality concerts. His final composition, the String Trio, was completed just 10 days before he was deported to Auschwitz and to his eventual murder. He continued to make music in the face of adversity, and he never allowed Nazi brutality to silence him. In his final camp, the coal mining slave labor camp of Fürstengruber, where he was killed, he even managed to smuggle a letter out from there, which made its way back to Prague, and in which he implores the recipients not to abandon him. But that's a whole story on its own, which lends itself to the title of the Czech version of my book, Letter from Gideon, and the title of the soon-to-be published English version, Don't Forget About Me. The 2019 centenary year undoubtedly boosted Gideon Klein's standing. His reputation as one of the 20th century's most fascinating musicians rises forever upwards. And for me, like his namesake in Sefer Shoftim, the Book of Judges, Gideon will forever be a great Jewish hero. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the interesting lecture and the sad story of Gideon Klein. And this is really important work you're doing in revealing his story. And those of you who would like to ask questions or make any remarks, you are welcome to do it in the chat, and or to wave your hand if you want to speak.
I'm sorry about some of the problems with the visuals and sound, but I think we got there in the end, didn't we?
Yes, here. So we have here Agnes, who would like to speak. You can unmute yourself. Agnes, we can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself. Can you do it?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Perfect now.
Okay. David, thank you very, very much. So I've just got, if I may, two questions and a comment. The questions, I couldn't really hear your video, the play, the 2019 one, but and I realized that one character was Gideon and the other one was his sister. But who was Ilona? That's my first question. Shall I ask the second question straight away, or?
I'll answer that now, Agnes. Ilona was Gideon's mother. And,
Sorry?
Ilona was Gideon's mother.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. And as for that little extract, I'll send you it.
Oh, thank you. So the second question is, I just wondered about the string trio. Sort of, I heard it on the grapevine that Gideon actually wanted to write a string quartet, but one of the players were killed, so he changed it into string trio. Have you heard about that, and is there any truth in it?
There's all sorts of myths surrounding some of the final works of the composers, you know, sort of towards the end of 1944. But if you have a look at the manuscripts of the string trio, there's no evidence that it was originally planned as a string quartet. Having said that, we've only got the one manuscript of it, so maybe there were other versions of it and other iterations, we don't know. But there's no hard evidence about that. I mean, yes, it's absolutely true, Agnes, that musicians were being deported at that time.
So may I now make my comment, please? Yeah, can I go ahead?
Yes,
Okay.
sure. Yeah.
Well, I'm a bit puzzled about the reason why all these works were not, they were hidden or forgotten about or something like that until 1990 or something like that. And David, you mentioned that it might have had to do like with anti-Semitism in Czechoslovakia. And I'm a bit puzzled about it because I grew up in Hungary around the same time. And yes, Jews were not liked by any means, but treasure like that could have been opened and made public. So I'm a bit worried about that aspect, that it was because of anti-Semitism in Czechoslovakia, while the Herzog family didn't want to make this treasure public. So I just thought I mentioned that. Sorry about that. Thank you so much.
I think, Agnes, it's a very valid point. All I can tell you is that talking to Czech, you know, Prague Jews, they undoubtedly echo the idea that one of the reasons why the music was hidden was because of anti-Semitism. But I think it's a far more complicated situation in any case.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Maury. Please unmute yourself.
You, my dear friend David, and
Great to see you.
Your lecture was just brilliant. It always is when it comes to this guy and a few others that you've crossed paths with. I do have one question. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that I read a statement by Gideon where he was critical of the quality of some of his colleague musicians. It seemed like a strange thing to put on paper in a place where, let's say, everyone is doing his best. Is this true? Did he say that? And how was it received? Do you know?
It is true, and I know exactly the report that you're referring to, actually. What I find interesting is that the musicians in Terezín, the composers in Terezín, considered themselves as professional musicians first and foremost, and consequently they didn't say, well, actually, aren't we doing, we're imprisoned and we are prisoners and so forth, and aren't we doing tremendously well making all this music? If the music making was poor, they would say so. And in point of fact, you will know, Murray, sort of reading Victor Ullmann's very carefully nuanced critiques of music making there. I mean, Ullmann was always very generous in his praise, we know that. But we only have to sort of read between the lines to know that even Ullmann at times says, well, this didn't quite come up to scratch and so forth. If it was poor, he would say it was poor. And it was the same with Gideon, where he's talking, for example, about the string orchestra that we see in the propaganda film, and he's basically saying, not bad for a group of prisoners, but in actual fact it wouldn't really get very far on an international stage. And what he says about the singers is even more damning than that.
Thanks, David. Thank you.
Anybody else who would like to ask or have a remark? Okay. So I would like to thank you very, very much.
Galit, I want to say something.
Oh, okay.
Galit, just unmute yourself.
Galit, we can't hear you.
1 second.
No.
Now it's okay, Galit.
Okay. Hi,
Yes.
David, thank you so much for a fascinating lecture. It's a pleasure to hear you. I just wanted to ask if you could clarify once again the nature of the relationship between the family that received the suitcase from Klein. What was it, a friend of the Klein family, or was it a specific friend of Klein himself?
Great to see you, Galit. And thanks for that question. Yes, there were friends. It was as simple as that Gideon felt that I mean, remember, we know how this story ends. We know that the story ends very tragically. But when he handed over the suitcase, he wasn't thinking, well, my goodness, I'm handing it over because I might not ever come back. As far as he was concerned, maybe he'd be back in a month or 6 months or something like that. I mean, after all, we do know that the Aufbau Commando young men from Prague were told that they'd be back by Christmas time. This was November. That would be back in Prague by Christmas time, and we knew that was a complete lie. But yes, they were friends, and he felt that it would be safe with them.
And just one final question: the score for the Poplar Tree, has it been published yet, or is it available for use for anyone?
It's going to be published by Berenreiter later this year, as far as I'm aware. Again, everything's been delayed because of the pandemic, hasn't it? But I'll send you a copy, Galit, if you can.
Thank you.
My scribblings on the score.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay. Anybody else who would like to ask or have a remark? אלה, את רואה מישהו? Okay.
No.
Okay. So thank you very, very much, David, for this interesting and fascinating lecture. And thank you all for joining us in our lecture. And have a good evening or night or morning, wherever you are. And thank you.